Hello, BookTube. Well, we come to it at last, the end of Dune. But not Frank Herbert's masterpiece. Rather, just the first part of his masterpiece, which is called Dune. And this is the first part of what is widely regarded as one of the greatest science fiction novels of all time. And it is the only part of the book that is a Bildungsroman. The only part of the book that is, in part anyway, the story of the maturing of a young man, the young protagonist, Paul Atreides, who is the heir to the Atreides family that has just been brought down by the evil Harkonnens on the planet Dune. Duke Leto, Paul's father, has been killed. We saw that scene, and we also saw the scene where Paul and Jessica, who are being flown out into the desert to be given to the sands and to the storms and to the giant worms of Dune, when they escape. They use mind control abilities of Jessica's own secret order, the Bene Gesserit, and they also use the physical abilities that have been trained into Paul to escape from their captors, kill their captors, and find themselves on the open sand. Hunted, because that chapter ends in a cliffhanger. It's one of the few times in the novel Dune where Frank Herbert stoops to ending a chapter with a cliffhanger, where they suddenly hear a Harkonnen vessel coming, a Harkonnen air vessel, an ornithopter, and they decide to run. The chapter ends there, and we move on to other places. Now we've moved back to Paul and Jessica. Now that we have a broader view of what's happening in the city, what's happening on the planet, the Harkonnens were aided by the Emperor with legions of his Sardaukar, his imperial super warriors, in disguised in Harkonnen livery. They were aided by the Emperor to overthrow the Atreides house, and apparently have succeeded. We don't know the fates of a lot of the characters that we have known in the first part of this book. Jessica and Paul escape. We're not 100% sure what has happened to anyone else. Tufir Hawat is a major leader of Duke Leto. Gurney Halleck, a major leader. Duncan Idaho, a major leader. We don't know what's happened to them yet. But we return in this chapter, the final chapter of the first section of this book, to Paul and Jessica. And it turns out they aren't running from a Harkonnen airship, because the ship was piloted by Duncan Idaho, who has given them some supplies and has promised them that he will get in touch with the Imperial planetologist, Kynes, who is a liaison from the Fremen, the native wild people of Dune. It's a stretch, it's a desperate move, but it's desperate times. They are without house, they are without resources. So Duncan Idaho has been and gone. We don't see him interacting with these characters in this chapter. Instead, it's just the two of them in a tent, waiting out the day. They can move around at night, but they can't really move around during the day. It's, in one sense, a very static chapter, which is a little bit counterintuitive, because it's by far the longest chapter that we've encountered so far. 5 times as long. It's mostly, again, very elegantly done info dumping, with a couple of big realization bombs thrown in to end this part of the book. One big realization bomb, one big change, is that something is happening to Paul. He realizes it right away in the fact that long before he knows who's operating that ornithopter, he knows who's operating that ornithopter. Now keep in mind, earlier in the book, he was told by his father that there's a chance that he has the potential to become a Mentat, which in this future world, which does not have advanced AI, is the human equivalent of advanced AI, super thinkers who can put together all kinds of information. Paul is prepared for that. And that's just one of the many lines of expectation that are on him. Another one that we have heard about from the beginning of this book is an expectation brooded by the Bene Gesserit themselves, which is that Paul may be the Kwisatz Haderach, a figure that they have been, not a mystic figure, a figure that they have been biologically shaping breeding lines to achieve. The Bene Gesserit have many, many extra abilities, all of which are fueled by spice, the spice melange, which can be found only on Dune. And one of those abilities is something that we have not really got a full exposure We haven't really been exposed to it yet. It hasn't really been exposed yet, but it has something to do with collective mind, collective memory. And the Bene Gesserit hope is that when they achieve a Kwisatz Haderach, they will achieve a man who can have Bene Gesserit abilities, spice-enhanced Bene Gesserit abilities, all of them. But including also this collective biological memory. Now, I have said many times before, I'll go to my grave wondering, why on earth the Bene Gesserit would want this? Why would they want this in the first place? But nevertheless, they do. And they have sent out an arm of their sisterhood to a whole bunch of disparate planets, savage places, pleasant places, far distant places. That branch is called the Missionaria Protectiva. And the sisters of that branch, their sole goal is to impregnate those worlds with mythologies, with folkloric cycles, impregnate the native people with those mythologies so that those mythologies will grow and fix in place and maybe help a member of the sisterhood in need. The Lady Jessica, who Paul's mother, is with him in the desert, has already sensed that the Missionaria Protectiva has been on Dune and has primed the populace, the native Fremen, for the coming of a Messiah, of a Mahdi, specifically including that he will be the son of Bene Gesserit and that he will come from off-world. You never know when such folkloric training for an entire population and entire generations might come in handy. It's one of the many helpful coincidences in Dune. But one of the bombshells in this chapter is that Paul suddenly realizes that whatever expectations have been placed on him, whatever training has been embedded in his own mind, mentat or otherwise, has gone up several notches. He has always been bothered by prescient dreams, where he sees things that he knows haven't happened yet, but that he knows will. When he's talking with the Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother who comes to examine him, he tells her that he can tell the difference between a normal dream and a dream that will happen, a dream that is not, in fact, a dream. So he has these abilities before he gets to the planet Dune. And we've been told that on Dune, spice is everywhere. Sure, your men might have to go out into the deep sands and mine the spice itself in order to harvest it and sell it for a staggering amount of money. It is, of course, the most valuable item in the universe. But it gets everywhere. Not in mineable quantities, but it's in the air, it's in the food, it's in the water, it's everywhere. It gets everywhere, and it affects you. It's a psychoactive drug. It's a highly addictive psychoactive drug. It's extremely powerful. Paul has not achieved the Ibad, the blue-on-blue eyes of the Fremen who are thoroughly infused with the spice, but he and we realize as he is noticing this enhanced awareness on his part that it's still affecting him. Even though he doesn't have that yet, the spice is everywhere on Dune. There's no way to avoid it. And it's changing him. It's changing him into something he was not before, into something that in this chapter he bitterly refers to a couple of times as a freak, which alarms his mother, who doesn't quite know what to do with this new person that she's in the tent with. She kind of expected, kind of hoped that she would be on the run with her son, but this person is not her son in any way that she recognizes. As she puts it, somewhat mechanically on Frank Herbert's part, there's no element of childhood in him anymore. This event, the downfall of his house, the death of his father, where he is now certain that the Duke is dead, and this internal change into this kind of freak has changed him. It has ended his childhood, the Bildungsroman part of Dune was very conveniently the first part of Dune, the part of Dune called Dune. That is now over. And Frank Herbert doesn't want you to leave any doubts about that, so he has characters essentially say it over and over again, that your childhood is over, that part of the book is now over. The other narrative bomb that's dropped in this book, in this chapter, is also a result of Paul's heightened awareness. Because at one point, after he's told the Lady Jessica what his father instructed him to tell, that I never doubted you, I had to act like I suspected you, but I never did. Please be comforted in that, if nothing else. Paul also tells Lady Jessica that she should put the Harkonnens out of her mind. There's something else going on here. And that they're not worth considering anyway, even though they are us and we are them. We are Harkonnens, you and I. He has seen it with his heightened awareness. He has seen it just through her physiognomy, just through the set of her bones and the hands and the face and the shape of the eyes and the nose and his own. And when he tells her that, Frida, cut it out, baby. When he tells her that, she's frantic. She almost blanks it out completely and says, well, some fugitive line, maybe some bywater cousin or other, and Paul just lets her have it between the eyes. You're the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen's own daughter. And I'm his grandson. So, to put it mildly, I again, at this point in the book, I've read this a million times, but we'll pretend that we're reading it for the first time together. And at this point in this book, I don't know if Thufir Hawat is alive or dead. But I again curse his name because he is the least competent mentat in the entire Imperium. How could he not have known this? How could he possibly not have known this? That not only is Jessica a Harkonnen, but that she's the daughter of the Duke's sworn enemy? How could he not know this? They don't have blood tests in this future world. Anyway, those are the two big revelation bombs in this chapter. One is that Paul is changing, and the second is that this is genetically a much more complicated book than we thought. Especially since, remember, Jessica has already revealed to the reader, and that she is pregnant. That she's the Duke impregnated her before he died with a girl, with a daughter, Alia. Paul knows this. He can see it. His awareness now extends along many different consciousness timelines, well into the future. And this is, keep in mind, without a spice trance. This is what before he has been fully infused with spice. His prescience is already amazing. So amazing that at one point, when Jessica looks at him, she is shocked to think, oh my God, he is the Kwisatz Haderach. And Paul shoots that down as well. The Sisterhood was aiming for the Kwisatz Haderach, the man who can be in many places at the same time, the man who can be a Bene Gesserit. But I'm not that. I'm not that. I've come before my time, and I'm different. I'm not what they expected at all, and they don't know it yet. Whatever I am, I'm not that. Paul distantly senses some of what he is that's connected with his sense of terrible purpose, with a brooding future, one possible future of which has an entire universe subjected to the Atreides flag, vast amounts of terror and bloodshed, all done in his name. There's a vague, brooding reality of that just past the edges of his enhanced awareness. We, as readers, if you've read the series, you know what's coming. You know that vision is, if nothing else, an understatement. But in this chapter, it's very, very effectively done. Not everything in this chapter is effectively done. This chapter, I think when you read it, anyone will say it's too long. Yes, it's a lot longer than any other chapter, but it needlessly so. I think it's just to wrap up this section of the book. We are now going to shift into a completely different narrative register. From Boy's Own Story, Bildungsroman, to Strangers in a Strange Land, to two outsiders learning the ways of an alien culture at their extreme peril with their survival on the line. But that is the end of part 1 of Dune. Paul and Jessica have survived the Harkonnens' attempt to exterminate their whole family. They're out in the desert, and there's a chance that this Kynes person will give them safe passage to the Fremen, who are their only means of survival. Obviously, the Fremen are their only means of survival. The cities have been completely taken by the Harkonnen. Paul has a goal in mind, as he tells his mother, which is to lay hands on the family atomics. Every family in this future Imperium has their own store of atomic weapons, which are strictly forbidden. You're not allowed to use them. But nevertheless, every family has that as a club over everybody else. Keep in mind when this was written. That was on Herbert's mind, same as it was on all the rest of us' mind. What do you do with these weapons if you can't use them? If there's a convention against using them, they're still there, carrying this huge club on your shoulder that you're just telling people you won't use. Jessica vaguely senses why Paul would consider this a priority. to threaten the spice on the planet. This is going to become incredibly important later on. Paul is trying to make it clear to his mother, but he says over and over again in this chapter how slow she is, how slow her understanding is, which is a big change from the earlier parts of the book, where she was the experienced Bene Gesserit, who's training him in perception. Suddenly he's seeing things much clearer than she is. That kind of parental disillusionment, whether it's with the mother or far more commonly with the father, is usually the sign that a Bildungsroman is over. That is usually the way these things end. It's done a little bit ham-handedly here, but I wouldn't consider this chapter ham-handed if it were half its length. I'm sure I would. But Paul sees the connection right away. It draws lines between dots that the reader might not have done yet, which is that the Fremen are using spice, the most valuable commodity in the universe, to pay the Spacing Guild to look the other way. There's a reason why there aren't weather control satellites over the planet Dune. There's a reason why it's allowed to be a sand-choked, worm-infested hellhole. It's because the Fremen they don't want any weather satellites modifying that. And what's the reason? Because weather satellites would show what they're doing in the deep deserts, and they don't want anyone to know that. We're starting to pull pieces together here, but now this section is over, and we move on to the second section of this book, Muad'Dib. In this chapter, we learn that Muad'Dib is... we've known all along that Muad'Dib is the Mahdi. He is a Fremen figure, a Messiah figure, a figure shaped in its expectation, but not created in its expectations by the Missionaria Protectiva, by the Bene Gesserit. So their hands are all over this. Paul might consider it useful. Jessica might consider it useful and a little bit parochial. She also wonders how Paul knows about the Missionaria Protectiva. But the key point, the key takeaway of this chapter and of the whole section, this whole first part of the book, is that whatever the Bene Gesserit were planning for, with the Missionaria Protectiva or with the Kwisatz Haderach, Paul is something else. He's more than what they're planning on. He's something unexpected. As he was from birth, right? Because the Lady Jessica was supposed to give the Duke a daughter. So we'll end this section here of Dune, and we will move on next time. So I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.